Good morning, folks, gentlemen. So today we're going to do a little bit about tradition on Thinking Man's Thursday. Missed figures. That's the last cigarette from the pack. That's why you hear different noises than normal. But I'm going to need that later. It's very cold here, so this is probably going to be a bit short. But you will see in the description a link to a definition of the word tradition. And it's actually to a website called Wordnik, which provides a lot of different definitions. I discovered that website not too long ago, and one of the things I really like is that it does in fact feature definitions from a pile of different dictionaries. The definition we're looking at today, which is also in the description, is, and I have to do this from memory at this point, not having actually written it down or have it displayed on the screen. A tradition is basically a custom handed down, basically becomes part of your heritage to the point that it almost has the force of law. Almost being the key word there. Traditions only have the power we give them, which is true for anything. But when it comes to talking about that particular definition of the word transition, the aspect I want to look at today is talking about how, with many of us, we like the idea of trad life. Now, unfortunately, a lot of us have the incorrect assumption that when we hear the expression trad life, we're talking about something from the American 50s, which was a very tiny, tiny part of human history, and a very small section of the globe, and really was not realistic, or it's not a great basis for your idea of being a traditional person. But one of the aspects I wanted to talk about today is the tradition of holding certain things sacred, whether they're written down in scripture or not. And there are certain codes of conduct that are traditional, but are not necessarily codified, not necessarily required by law. There is no law that requires a good man to hold a door for a lady. There is no law that requires a man to stand aside when his friend picks a fight. There is no law that requires you, there should be no law, that requires you to get involved when you see someone committing a crime. These are traditions. These are what traditional men do. These are what good men do. And they're called a good man because they follow these traditions. You've heard me rail in various places about the lack of good men getting involved in situations where you'll see a woman being brutalized by a man. The subway in New York, for example. That incident from, I believe it was around the new year, last year, not 22 to 23, but 21 to 22. There was that woman who was being dragged around by her hair, screaming for help. People were standing around recording. If there had been a good man there, they would have stepped in and flattened that piece of shit. Or at the very least, intervened in some way. You might not physically be able to take the guy. Doesn't matter. Defend the fucking victim. If you see... Now, this is going to piss off people who love animals. And people who are animal rights activist types. But you'll understand. If you're a good man. If you see a dog attacking a child, kick the shit out of the dog. Human life takes precedence. Yes, you can call me speciest all you like. I am. I am absolutely 100% a human chauvinist. Sorry. Well, not sorry. But if you see an animal attacking a child, or attacking another person, fucking help the person. That said, if they're an idiot who put themselves in danger by thinking, oh, I'm going to go take a picture of this bear from 10 feet away, maybe smack them and drag them away, if you can do it without putting yourself or someone you love in danger. I may be a speciest, but I have no duty to prevent you from failing to uphold your own survival instinct. And that might actually be a better synonym for tradition. It's the idea of duty. And yeah, I can hear at least one of you giggling because my little inner 15-year-old is going, duty. Yeah. But, sorry. But, if you don't hold yourself to a code of conduct as a man, and when your gut instinct is to help someone, or to correct a situation headed south, like Captain America says in Civil War, yeah, I recently rewatched it, sometimes I want to be able to stop myself from involving myself in a situation going south. No. And Tony in the film, Iron Man in the film, immediately cuts him off and says, no, you don't. And he admits to, yeah, no, he doesn't. He wants to get involved. If you see something going wrong and you have the power to correct it, do so. You know, there are people who will always there are always going to be people who will take advantage of you for being a good man. It's not your job to correct their behavior, if you can't. Your job is to be the example of good behavior, of tradition, of duty, of honor, of integrity. Steven Crowder, with his stance that his argument with the Daily Wire, his position was not monetary. He was not using some sort of negotiating tactic, which a lot of people don't seem to get. Personally, when Steven Crowder says it's not about the money, I believe him. And I see exactly where he's coming from. His whole point was to try to make something better for other people, to act with the duty of a traditional man, to do good where he can, for who he can, especially for his own. Sorry, my fingers are getting numb. But and as you can tell, this is why I'm not doing a lot of woodworking in the shed at the moment. It's very cold. Far too cold to be comfortable. But if you're going to live a traditional lifestyle, then you do put yourself at certain risks nowadays. For example, if you see a man beating his woman, or beating a woman, and you involve yourself, you do run the risk of potentially facing an assault charge, potentially having the woman herself turn around and attack you. And yes, I understand these are the risks that sometimes paralyze people. But the view I have is, if I see people doing each other harm, and generally, if it's men, I would probably not involve myself. If it's a man and another man having a fight, a consensual fight, no, I would most likely not involve myself. Partly because I have the attitude that the consensual duel is probably a good way to sort out interpersonal conflicts, at least on occasion, or at least in certain circumstances. But if you see something that your gut immediately labels wrong, then you do somewhat have a duty to do something. And yeah, I know it skirts dangerously close to the left's, if you see something, say something. Don't just say something. Don't record a beating. Well, if it's a cop beating, you know, a helpless civilian, or 5 black cops beating up a black kid, or another black man. Yeah, that I would record. And do so in such a way that you are, safe, not targeted by those people. That said, well, here's a good example of the duty that a good man has. My father and I were driving on a highway very late one night. And as we were driving on the side of the road, we saw a car that was kind of not exactly in the ditch, but it was very much off the road. And there was some appearance of some sort of distress. Something had gone wrong. There were skid marks, braking indicators, and the car was at an unusual angle. So my father, being a good traditional man, stopped his vehicle, got out, and had a look to see if there was anyone in the vehicle in distress. There was no one there. But that incident has stuck with me, because that illustrates very well the duty of a good man to get involved for the good of his own people. And depending on how far you extend that circle of your own people, you will want the good of as many people as possible. Now, being that I'm in the white positive sphere, one of the things that we rail against is the outgroup preference behavior of many white people, where they will act against the interests of their own in order to further the interests of people they may never even meet, let alone interact with, and who may, in fact, be negatively disposed towards them as an individual, or white people in general. And one of the things that the white positive sphere, the Go Free group, whatever you want to call us, other than racist, because that's not actually the truth, one of the things that we want, or we try to do, is to promote the good and well-being of white folk, of Westerners, of the Western culture, the white race. These are essentially synonymous these days. And one of the things that I really abhor is the outgroup preference of many liberal white people, especially the urbanites, who think that somehow virtue signaling about, the genocide in Rwanda makes them better people. Meanwhile, they're walking past a homeless person who's just looking for food and happens to be white and a man. Yeah. I've always said, and there is a traditional saying, that charity begins at home. So you work from within your own house, then your own community, extend that, your household, your family, your friends, your community, your country, your region, your country, and your nation. And country and nation are not necessarily the same. If you have any familiarity with the terminological changes of the Native American population, or the Native Canadian population, the Native North Americans, or the natives of the Americas, for sake of a better term, then you know that in Canada especially, these folks have gone from being called Indians to being called, if I recall, at one point they were called Native Canadians, uh, First Nations, and if you interact with them personally, you will find that quite a lot of them either call themselves Indian, NDN, where they remove the vowels, uh, which is apparently a political choice. But the labeling changes. But these are still the same people. And I've kind of lost the thread of my point there. I'm coming up in 16 minutes. So really what I'm getting at is, if you want to be a traditional person, there are certain duties, responsibilities, and obligations that you do have to take on. For example, keeping children from doing themselves harm. Now, I don't mean stopping kids from fighting. Little kids should be allowed to fight, at least to a point. And they should also have the etiquette of a schoolyard fight instilled in them, where it's meant to be one-on-one, and, at least when I was a child, if you knock the other guy down, fight's over. Or if there's a yield, which, yeah, is a bit of a dueling thing. But once you're at that point, the fight is done, at least between boys. Girls are a different story, and we're not dealing with that. I don't really want to get into the psychology of girls, mostly because I don't understand the psychology of girls. Never having been one, and having no intention of ever being one. I'd make an ugly woman, wouldn't I? But, how to put this as a final wrapper on this? Basically, there are codes of conduct that have come down to us from our fathers, and their fathers, and their fathers' fathers, all the way back. And if you want to be a traditional person, a traditional man, then you don't get to ignore any part of it. There are some practices that should be ignored, or even abhorred, circumcision being one of them. Infant genital mutilation is wrong on every level, no matter whether it's boys, girls, whether it's religious or cultural. It's just wrong, and it's unnecessary. I'm just about at 18 minutes now. So, just to wrap this up, if you want to be a traditional person, you need to learn what the traditions are that you should be following. So go and talk to your people. Go talk to your grandparents. If you're lucky enough to still have your great-grandparents around, you have no idea how wonderful a resource that is. Go and talk to those people as much as you possibly can. And be honest about it. Don't just say, oh, I just want to hang out. No, tell them, look, I want you to tell me stories about life when you were younger. I want you to tell me what people were like back then, how men behaved. And, you're going to learn in short order that trad wife image of the American 50s housewife is just an illusion. It's very, very rare, even in the 1950s America. In any case, folks, I hope you're having a good day. I hope you continue to have good days. And rise again until lambs become lions. Bye-bye.